Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. Today we got a pretty fun one. We're going to look into a build for the Path of the Giant Barbarian. There was a small buff to the Path of the Giant that sort of happened incidentally as a result of the changes in the 2024 rules. We had a lot of fun putting the information for this video together just because it was a lot of interesting stuff to me. This is kind of like stuff that I really enjoy about the game, is kind of all these kind of minute details and kind of how they all fit together. So I always really like when you find that perfect rabbit hole to kind of go down and kind of find all the little cool things that interact with each other. In my last video, we talked about like kind of how dual wielding scales throughout the game in comparison to things like Great Weapon Master. You know, I covered that in a video a long time ago, just based on the weapons themselves. In my previous video on Sunday, I kind of applied some subclasses to it and see how different subclasses scale if you just take them all the way down. So in this one, I'm going to focus on, again, dual wielding versus Great Weapon Master again, but I'm going to do it in a very specific, even multi-classing build, focusing on the Path of the Giant Barbarian because they've had, again, a very interesting buff that disproportionately benefits a dual wielding playstyle also. So I wanted to kind of merge all that together into kind of one sort of super build. So let's go ahead and get into it and not waste any more time. So first things first, what is this change that I'm talking about? So in 2014, the rage damage bonus only applied when making a melee weapon attack using strength. This also meant that it didn't affect unarmed strikes, and it did not affect ranged attacks with melee thrown weapons. You specifically had to be making a melee weapon attack, as in an attack with a weapon in melee range. However, in 2024, the rage damage bonus rules changed ever so slightly, in the sense that you get that damage bonus whenever you make an attack using strength. So this means that you can use them on unarmed strikes as well as ranged attacks with thrown weapons using strength, which would be melee weapons, not ranged weapons that have the thrown property. So how does this affect the Path of the Giant Barbarian in particular? So the cheese that we can take advantage of now, and it's not really cheese, it's not really an exploit, it is just maybe an artifact of the fact that the Path of the Giant was developed before the release of the 2024 Player's Handbook. I feel like this was relatively recent, so I'm a little surprising that maybe they did do this on purpose, maybe they didn't. But basically what it says is that they have a third level feature called a Crushing Throw. It says when you make a successful ranged attack with a thrown weapon using strength, you can add your rage damage bonus to the attack's damage roll. So in 2014, this was necessary in order to add the rage damage bonus to that thrown weapon attack. However, with the changes to the way that the rage damage bonus is worded in 2024, this allows you to double the rage damage bonus on thrown weapon attacks because there's no restriction against applying the rage damage bonus more than once. So you first apply the rage damage bonus because you're just making an attack with a weapon using strength. You can also add it again because you're making a successful ranged attack with a thrown weapon using strength. So you're kind of double dipping on your rage damage bonus. So this makes the first rage bonus to thrown attacks very front loaded. I mean, rage damage bonus is front loaded in general. That's, it starts at 2 and then increases to 3 and 4. So it's 2 the first time, then 1 the second time, and 1 the third time. But when you're doubling that, then of course the first time you get the bonus, it's +4, then again +2, and then +2. So that's like a +8 to thrown weapon attacks just from your rage damage bonus with the Giant Havoc Barbarian if you go all the way to level 17 with them. But maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe there's some more low-hanging fruit, and maybe you're not going to level 17, so you need to find out how to eke out a little more damage as you go up in levels when you know that you're not going to hit a higher level. But before we do that, we kind of need to understand how this is going to work with thrown weapons, and particularly when it comes to dual wielding and the dual wielding playstyle with the light weapons and the Nick Mastery and the dual wielding bonus action attack. So I always talk about switching out weapons for dual wielding as juggling, but we might have to do some actual juggling in this one since we are throwing weapons. So one thing that has changed with the thrown weapon property in 2024 is that it now says that you can draw that weapon as part of the attack. This is very similar to the ammunition property where you can draw an ammunition as part of the attack. So thrown weapons now work very similarly to ammunition, where when you make the attack to throw that weapon, if it is stowed somewhere on your body, like in a sheath or somewhere easily accessible, obviously I don't think you could reach into a bag of holding and pull it out and throw it, because reaching into a bag of holding requires the magic action, I believe, if I recall correctly. I would even say just reaching into a bag would require some sort of action as well. It needs to be like on a holster somewhere on your body. But as a part of, that movement to make that attack, you can just draw it, throw it, and that's it. And notably, this is also different than the equipping and unequipping weapons rule, which is under the attack action rules and the rules glossary in the Player's Handbook for 2024. This one says that you can either equip or unequip one weapon when you make an attack as part of the action. So if you're not throwing weapons, you can just draw a weapon as you are making an attack. Notably, it also does say here that if you equip a weapon before you attack, you don't need to attack with that weapon, which does also make it different than the thrown weapon property rule, because the thrown weapon property, you are drawing the weapon that you are going to attack with. So these two things can actually kind of work together, where you can draw a weapon for free as you're going to throw it as part of the thrown weapon property. But also, let's say you have a returning weapon that you need to put away for some reason. So you draw it for free, you throw it, it immediately appears back in your hand after it hits or misses. choices. And then using the equipping and unequipping rules, you can also then stow that weapon back in your holster to then maybe pull out another thrown weapon as part of the next attack. And so you can really juggle it that way. This is more clear cut to me than even like the dual wielder feat where you can draw or stow two weapons at the same time that you could draw or stow only one. I've previously talked about how it's kind of unclear. Does that mean that you can stow one weapon and then draw another, or do you have to draw two weapons or stow two weapons? This I feel is much more clear, where you can draw a weapon as part of the thrown property, and then if it's like a returning weapon, it comes back in your hand. Then you can use the equip and unequipping weapons to then stow that back and have a free hand again to do whatever you need to do with. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the Path of the Giant Barbarian does get a returning weapon at level 6. They have a feature called Elemental Cleaver. You choose one weapon when you enter your rage. You infuse that weapon with a particular elemental damage type listed here. The weapon deals that kind of damage, and it also deals an extra 1d6 of that damage type. That weapon also gains the thrown property, has a normal range of 20 feet and a long range of 60 feet. And then it says if you throw the weapon, it reappears in your hand the instant after it hits or misses the target. So you have a returning weapon. So if you need to draw it, throw it, and then get it back in your hand and then stow it, you should be able to do that given the rules here. So let's talk about actually putting these rules in place. So I'm going to again put up all these sort of parameters, my arbitrary rules for actually making use of the build that we're going to go into. So first things first, our max level is 12. I chose 12 kind of on a whim before I even started putting this together because, again, most adventures don't really go beyond that level. And I also think that just when it comes to multi-classing, because again, we are going to multi-class, it is allowed and encouraged in this build. You definitely make different decisions whether you are going to like level 12 versus level 20. Like you're going to multi-class very differently depending on what the max level that you're going to is. Initially, my idea was level 13 instead, and then by the time I got done, doing all the math and figuring everything out, I realized I didn't really need that last level. There were like one level that I could take that could eke out a little bit more damage, but nothing was really impressive beyond level 12, so I just kind of called it at level 12. We'll be using point buy, of course. We'll be starting with 17 strength and 13 wisdom. We'll ignore origin feat, so you can play what you want. We're going to ignore species, so you can play what you want. There's only really a small number of species that even have damaging effects, such as like the Aasimar or the old bugbear. At level 4, we're going to take a strength increasing feat. This is going to be dual wielder for the light weapon playstyle, and of course great weapon master for the heavy weapon playstyle. The eternal battle continues. I will say sort of before we get into it that when I was doing this, I did also calculate the damage for like a 1d12 weapon versus a 1d10 weapon, like if it's a versatile weapon or you're using one of the pole arms without polearm master. Generally speaking, the 1d12 weapons are only marginally behind the 2d6 weapons, which makes sense. And then the 1d10 weapons are kind of noticeably behind the 2d6 weapons. By the time we got to level 12, it was a difference of like 5 damage per round, basically. Early levels, it was like 2.5 to 3 damage per round between the 2d6 and the 1d10 weapons. So if that sort of split matters to you, then that's something to keep in mind. The only mastery we're going to be considering again is the Nick mastery, because again, it's required for the dual wield kind of play style. We're going to be ignoring other masteries. Again, I'm not trying to tell you guys how to play unless I feel like it's specifically required for the build to work. So obviously things like Graze, for example, could increase the damage of a great weapon master build if you're using a great sword. Topple is actually sort of a non-bow, like a non-combo, because you would have disadvantage on ranged attacks, although something like Push would be also very good given this play style. So you can kind of pick and choose whatever you want. They will all have their advantages and disadvantages. For this build, we'll just be starting at level 6 because you're basically a normal barbarian up until then, and you don't have a returning weapon before then. So any weapon you throw, you will have to eventually retrieve. And obviously you can carry a number of weapons on you as well, but either after combat or sometime during combat, you're going to have to run up to wherever you threw your weapons and pick them up and then throw them again, which can be a fun little thing to do as far as role playing and things like that, but just something to keep in mind as we're doing this. And that's again a big reason that we're starting at level 6 when we get the returning weapon. The next time we get to choose a feat, we'll take the ability score increase. This won't necessarily be at level 8, so we'll take +2 to strength at that time to cap our strength. Because we're a barbarian, we're just going to assume that we have reckless attack all the time for permanent advantage. So that'll give us 84% accuracy on curve. This is based on a 60% base accuracy without advantage, 84% with. When we are off curve, and what I mean by off curve is that we are level 8 or higher and we have not maxed our primary ability, which is strength in this case. So when we're off curve and attacking with advantage, that accuracy drops to 79.8%. 10% crit chance with advantage. It's not exactly 10%, but it's close enough. We're also going to try to minimize setup, and what I mean by that is we're not going to try to stack on a bunch of different effects that require like our bonus action on this turn and then our action on the next turn and then this on that turn and then like on our 4th turn and then we're really pumping. And in a perfect world, all we do is rage on our first turn of combat and go from there. And so the numbers that we're actually going to see are not going to include the rage turn. They will be like basically the turns after that where we have our bonus action available to attack. Finally, the only fighting styles that we'll be looking into here are the thrown weapon fighting style, the 2-weapon fighting style, and the great weapon master fighting styles when they become relevant. And speaking of those fighting styles, I do want to touch real quick on thrown weapon fighting versus two weapon fighting. I kind of touched this on my last video when we talked about dueling versus two weapon fighting. In some cases, one might be better than the other. So thrown weapon fighting with a full dual wielding build can add up to 8 damage per round because it is 2 damage per attack. This has the advantage of spreading the damage over each attack, so missing one of the attacks that it affects isn't as impactful. And if you are using your bonus action to do something other than attack, it only reduces the damage from 8 to 6, so that's not a very large reduction in damage. However, one of the drawbacks to this is that it can only scale if you get more attacks, and that is kind of a difficult thing to do. We will be doing it in the build that we're going to look at, but sometimes that's very situational. And then when we talk about two weapon fighting with a full dual wielding build, and what I mean by full dual wielding is that you're using the Nick Mastery and the dual wielding feat to unlock basically 3 attacks during your attack action and then 1 bonus action attack. So this adds your ability score modifier to your Nick attack as well as your bonus action attack from dual wielder. So when that's +4, that can be up to 8 damage per round or 10 damage per round if you have a +5 modifier. However, this damage is only loaded into the Nick attack as well as the dual wielder bonus action attack. If you're using your bonus action to do something else, then of course you're cutting that potential value in half. However, one of the big advantages of the two weapon fighting style is that it continues to scale if your strength or whatever your ability score is increases above 20. So if you have like a 26 in strength, then you're going to get that extra 3 damage not only to your main attacks but also to the Nick attack as well as the dual wielding bonus action attack. Generally speaking, for builds that will regularly be able to use their bonus action to attack, you might choose two weapon fighting. If you have a build that doesn't need the dual wielding feat, such as a monk or a class that just has a lot of other bonus actions, such as maybe like a paladin with their smites and like their divine favors and other things like that, you might choose like the thrown weapon fighting or maybe in their case the dueling fighting style, which is basically the same thing but for melee attacks. That it isn't really a big difference either way, but I just think it's worth pointing out. And since I mentioned the dueling fighting style, let's touch on that real quick, because some people might be thinking you can stack the dueling fighting style with the thrown weapon fighting style. There was a small wording change in 2024 where it says when you're holding a melee weapon in one hand and no other weapons, whereas in 2014 it said when you're wielding a melee weapon in one hand and no other weapons. I feel like this seems to imply that Wizards of the Coast is not intending for the dueling fighting style to also stack with the thrown weapon fighting style, because you have to actually be holding the weapon and not just wielding it, which could be any interpretation of like using it as a weapon. So since you're not holding the thrown weapon when it does damage, then the dueling bonus would technically not apply. Your DM might allow it, in which case you could really try to go ham by completing the trifecta of thrown weapon fighting with dueling with two weapon fighting. But for our purposes, we'll assume that we can't. So then the last thing I want to talk about is the use of versatile weapons. So in normal dual wielding situations, weaving in a versatile weapon is one way that you can help increase your overall damage while dual wielding. I'm not going to go into the minutia of it here, but using versatile weapons as a Path of the Giant thrower build isn't as effective. For one, the elemental cleaver bonus only applies to one weapon. If we are making that our versatile weapon, then we only get 2 attacks with that bonus. 1 attack during our attack action, as well as our dual wielder bonus action attack, because we still need to make one of our main attacks with a light weapon in order to trigger the Nick Mastery in order to throw that weapon as well. The second drawback of a versatile weapon with this particular build is that versatile weapons can only be used on a melee attack. So even though we can use the bigger damage dice of a D8 as opposed to a D6, we can't use the full D10 damage die of a versatile weapon by holding it with 2 hands. Like you can't do like a big axe toss with a versatile weapon with a thrown weapon build. You can only use them on melee attacks, unfortunately. For a barbarian build such as this one, weaving in a versatile weapon is marginally better before level 6, since we are, mainly focusing on the benefits of that level 6 feature combined with the bonus of the level 3 feature to thrown weapons. The math works out such that it is more effective to just use a 1d6 light weapon as our elemental cleaver weapon, since every attack other than the Nick attack can benefit from the extra 1d6 damage dice of that feature. And overall, this actually works out much better for us when we consider the actual logistics of using thrown weapons in a build like this. For heavy weapons playstyles, when we're just kind of throwing our weapons around, once you have the returning weapon from Elemental Cleaver, you don't need to really worry about having other weapons on you. That one big weapon is going to keep coming back to you every time you throw it. If you want to take advantage of a different mastery in the moment, of course you can pull out a different weapon and throw it. It's just not going to come back to you. However, for the light weapon playstyle, at least one of your weapons won't have the returning effect. This will likely be your Nick weapon mastery. And so whatever your Nick weapon is, you're going to need to have many of them. The only light Nick weapons with the thrown property are going to be daggers and light hammers. These are both 1d4 weapons. They both cost 2 gold each. So you'll just need to try to make sure that you have enough of them on you to get through a combat with them regardless of how long that combat may be. Of course, during combat, you can go to where they are and pick them up and throw them again. But you definitely want to have maybe at least, I would say maybe 5 on you just to be safe. The main weapon that you're going to use for the elemental cleaver should be a light weapon because we still need to be able to trigger Nick. The light weapons with the highest damage die are going to be your hand axe and your short sword. These are both 1d6 weapons. They both have the Vex Mastery. It's a little unfortunate that they both have the Vex Mastery as a barbarian because we don't really need it. If there's a situation where we don't have any rages left or aren't able to get into a rage for some reason, maybe it'd be useful, but hopefully we're never in that situation because this particular build really relies on being able to get into its rage. In the build we're about to go over, we will actually have access to a lot of different masteries, so while Vex isn't super important for the barbarian, you could just essentially carry a small arsenal of weapons with different masteries and have masteries with those weapons instead. So maybe in the moment, like if you want to try to topple someone, you can pull out your topple weapon and throw that weapon instead as one of your attacks, or push, or slow, or sap, whatever you think is kind of useful in the moment. Or even though maybe using the versatile weapon playstyle where you use a versatile weapon twice, a light weapon once, and your Nick weapon once is technically slightly less damage. You know, maybe you'll look at the combat that you're about to go into and be like, you know what, I think I want to pull out my versatile weapon because it has this particular mastery and use that more often. You just want to make sure that you have enough weapons to do all the other throwing that you need to do. For example, keeping some weapons that have like the push or slow mastery could actually be very good if you want to continue into later barbarian levels, particularly when you get to level 9 and you get the brutal strikes feature, because that also gives you the ability to push on that feature or slow on that feature, which would stack with those weapon bonuses where you can like do push and slow or slow and push or push and push or slow and slow and really kind of lock enemies down or get them really out of position or do a lot of cool things like that. We're not going to do that in this build, but it is definitely something you could consider. Again, the exercise here is to at least reasonably try to stack as much damage on a dual wielding thrower as possible, even if we're ignoring sort of other useful non-damaging effects. So with all that preamble aside, let's go ahead and get into the actual build itself, starting again at level 6. So on the left side, we have dual wielding. On the right side, we have their heavy weapon master. We have all the sort of factors that are playing into it. We have the main attack damage. We have the Nick attack damage, as well as the bonus action damage. And again, like I do in many of my videos, for the purposes of Great Weapon Master, I can only assume the bonus action at the same rate as we crit, because there's no real way to account for getting attack when you drop a creature to 0. I don't know if you're in a combat with one big single monster, or if you have a bunch of small monsters that you can get the bonus action attack off of. There's no real way to account for that, so I just assume the crit rate equaling the bonus action attack rate. So at this level, at level 6, as just a barbarian, once we get that elemental cleaver property, we have a 42.3 DPR for the light weapons build and a 39.9 DPR for the heavy weapons build. So currently, at least at this level, the light weapons build is slightly ahead. We're going to then jump to level 8. We're actually going to take 2 levels in ranger at this level. This is going to allow us to pick up a fighting style. So for light weapons, that's going to be the thrown weapon fighting. For great weapons, we're going to pick up great weapon fighting, of course, which gives us a higher average damage dice. Because we are level 8 and we have not maxed our strength yet, then our accuracy has dropped just slightly to 79.8. And it was actually at this moment when I was considering which class to multi-class into that I kind of started thinking about subclass or class dips as what is the damage per level, like how much more damage am I getting per level of investment in this class. I didn't really end up going too deep into that, but it was really just a way of thinking about building a character in D&D that I had never really approached from before. For example, like in the last video I mentioned, the Oathbreaker Paladin gets their Aura of Hatred. That comes online at level 7. That allows them to add their Charisma bonus to all their weapon attacks. However, that requires being a level 7 in the Oathbreaker Paladin. While the Paladin does give us a fighting style as well at level 2, just like the Ranger does, the Barbarian can no longer smite while raging like they could in 2014, because smites are actual spells that you cast in 2024. So the Barbarian Paladin build doesn't work quite as well as it maybe used to. So that was an option that I considered, but because both the Ranger and the Paladin both give us a fighting style, going 7 levels into it just for maybe like a +1 or 2, given the build that we need to make here, wasn't really a good return on investment, at least for this specific situation. You might also be asking why Ranger over Fighter, and part of that reason is because initially, at least, I was trying to avoid situational burst like action surge. However, don't worry about that, we will get there. But we can see that even with our accuracy dropping a little bit, adding the thrown weapon fighting style versus the great weapon fighting style, the light weapon playstyle is still a little bit ahead here at 46.6 versus 43.2. So then let's go on and move on to level 9. This is when we get our subclass. So we're going to go Ranger level 3. We're actually going to pick up the Hunter subclass. Normally the Hunter subclass isn't great. You know, if you're doing the 2014 subclass builds, then obviously Gloomstalker would give you the first round 1 benefits. However, the Gloomstalker was kind of nerfed in 2024, and I'm following those rules instead. The Gloomstalker can potentially add more damage, but it can only do so a limited number of times, and I'm trying to avoid those kinds of effects. But the Hunter subclass is kind of interesting in that it's not a great subclass overall, but that first level 3 feature is kind of gas for like pretty much many martial builds. It gives us basically 2 different fighting modes. One is called Giant Slayer, the other is called Horde Breaker. Giant Slayer gives us 1d8 extra damage once per turn when we attack a creature who doesn't have their full health. And then Horde Breaker is similar to the Cleave Mastery, where we can make an additional attack against a creature within 5 feet of the creature we just hit, assuming that we haven't already attacked that creature this turn. So whenever you finish a short rest, you can pick one of those modes. So it does require a little bit of planning ahead and knowing what you're going into. But that Horde Breaker is a huge boon to any martial class that can take advantage of it. Because we're level 9, all our proficiency bonus also goes up to +4, which is going to benefit the Great Weapon Master, of course. So we can see in our totals down at the bottom that for the Giant Slayer mode, the light weapon build is still marginally ahead, but then we can see that the Great Weapon Master, when it goes into Horde Breaker, pulls ahead very noticeably with about a 7 damage per round difference. You know, I said many times before that more attacks generally benefits the bigger weapons, and so it's no surprise to see that here. So we're going to go on from level 9 to then level 10. We're going to take our 4th level in Ranger to pick up the feat. Essentially, we're going to take our ability score increase. So our strength bonus goes up to 5. Our accuracy goes up to 8, back up to 84%. Overall, I mean, the numbers increased slightly, but the gaps between them are about the same. So then let's move on to level 11 when we get a big change. So now we're going to take 1 level in Fighter. Again, we are going down that path. The 1 level in Fighter does give us another fighting style as well as more masteries, like we did get from the Ranger as well. So for the light weapons build, we're going to, of course, take the 2-weapon fighting style to be able to add our strength bonus to our Nick attack, as well as our dual-wielding bonus action attack. Unfortunately, for the heavy weapon user, there are no other offensive fighting styles for them, so you can just take any fighting style so you can focus on your defenses or whatever you're trying to do. That is the only change at this level, so we can see that for the Giant Slayer, it is 63.5 versus 54.5, so that is a big gap now in favor of the light weapons build. And then for the Horde Breaker, that is 74.9 versus 73.7 in favor of light weapons. So it's a very marginal increase, and definitely on turns where the heavy weapon user gets their bonus action attack, obviously that's going to pull them ahead. But again, remember that the light weapon user can regularly make their bonus action attack every turn whenever they want to. So that is just much more consistent damage, at least. So then let's move on to our final level, and of course we're going to go to our second level of Fighter. Of course, all we get at this level is Action Surge. So even though the light weapons were ahead of the heavy weapons in our last level, once you hit that Action Surge, again, more attacks usually benefits the bigger weapons, and we can definitely see that that's the case here. Light weapons 95.2 versus 102.2 when using Giant Slayer, and then when we throw in Horde Breaker, that's 106.5 versus 121.5. Again, unsurprising that the Action Surge benefits the heavier weapon, but again, that is only once per short rest. Basically, the rest of the time, the light weapon user is still better, again, most of the time, or at least more consistent. Well, I mentioned before that when I was doing this, I wasn't really looking for situationally powerful effects like an Action Surge. One of the things I was considering initially was a 3-level dip into Warlock to go for the Hexblade Warlock, specifically modifying it for 2024, where you get the subclass at level 3, specifically just for Hexblade's Curse to be able to add our proficiency bonus to all of our attacks, as well as increase our crit range. But then I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do something that gives me a big powerful boost once per short rest, then I really should just go into the Fighter, because not only does it give us that other fighting style, but it also just gives us Action Surge, and Action Surge is more often than not better than Hexblade's Curse. Hexblade's Curse might give you more value over the duration of a longer fight, assuming that the target with Hexblade's Curse lives long enough to do that, but generally speaking, Action Surge is better. So those are the numbers up to level 12. Again, I mentioned initially that when I first started this, I was going to go up to level 13. So let's talk about that 13th level. So there really aren't a whole lot of options that are going to provide huge benefits for us. Of course, you could go Fighter level 3 to get the subclass option. Battle Master obviously is a good choice for the maneuvers and the extra damage that comes with the maneuvers. Champion provides a nice passive crit range increase, although small increases to crit range don't really result in huge damage boosts, on average at least. Certainly in the moment when you land on those 19s and 20s, it'll be much more exciting, but on average, it doesn't really account for much. 5th level in Ranger could give us 2nd level Ranger spells, which maybe doesn't help us much in combat, but could give us some more out of combat utility. Or we could just keep going in Barbarian. Level 7 gives us advantage on initiative, or the ability to move half our speed when we enter our rage, which could be very useful for combats as well. Or if we knew we were going beyond those levels, like say we knew that we were going to level 15 instead, we could stick with Barbarian and get up to level 9, which not only gives us the Brutal Strikes, which gives us an extra D10 once per turn potentially, as well as the ability to push or slow a target, but it's also the level level at which we get the next rage damage bonus increase. So we'd get a +2 to all of our damage on top of that. However, this actually isn't the end. I have one more bonus sort of build for you. So we're going to look at a level 13 build that I initially kind of looked at. This is going to include an unofficial subclass, but we're going to look at the Blood Hunter, specifically the Ghost Slayer Blood Hunter. We are Barbarian 6, Ranger 4, Blood Hunter 3. So the Blood Hunter also does come with a fighting style. And the reason we're going into them specifically is for the Crimson Right feature, which allows us to add 1d4 to each of our attacks. And the Ghost Slayer specifically allows you to do an extra 2d4 instead against undead targets. So the powerful thing about the Crimson Right feature is that you basically take a little bit of damage when you sort of apply that bonus to one of your weapons. And then that bonus lasts until you finish a short or long rest. And you can do this to any number of weapons. You just can't do it to a weapon more than once. So if you are dual wielding, like using, again, one light weapon with your elemental cleaver, and then you have like maybe like, you know, again, a handful of daggers, you could apply that to all of those. So as long as you have a way to offset the damage that you take from imbuing those weapons after every short rest, such as, I don't know, a Cure Wounds, which is buffed in 2024 from your 4 levels in Ranger, it's basically just free damage. The Blood Hunter is obviously unofficial material, and I don't usually like to include those in my builds, you know, because not every DM is necessarily going to improve them. However, this is one of those class/subclass features that I've always kind of had in the back of my head that is very good for dual wielding. So the reason I wanted to bring that up in this case is because I do believe that it's kind of showing us something that maybe we didn't quite realize before. So we have stated previously that dual wielding does like having more bonuses that add damage per hit. But what I think this is showing us is that not only that, but it specifically wants more damage dice per hit. And the reason for that would be that flat damage bonuses don't scale with critical hits. And because dual wielders are making so many more attacks regularly every turn, they are more likely to land a critical hit. You know, they have the same % chance to crit, but they're just making more attacks, so they will crit more often. So when we're rolling extra damage dice on each of our attacks, those dice will scale with the critical damage as well. And that's kind of some insight that I don't think is immediately obvious, but I think it just really makes sense when you kind of see it play out like this. So that is everything I had for this video today. Again, this wasn't supposed to be like the most powerful build. I was just trying to add as many class features as I could reasonably and try to make as much use of the sort of dual wielding playstyle combined with the Path of the Giant Thrower Barbarian, and then of course see how that compares to the looming threat of the Heavy Weapon Great Weapon Master doing the exact same thing that they are. So I think this is just one more case where we can say that in 2024 dual wielding is definitely sort of at least on par with Great Weapon Master. Again, Great Weapon Master can certainly burst harder if it's allowed to get more attacks. However, on average, dual wielding is much more consistent, assuming that you regularly have your bonus action open to make that extra attack. So let me know what you think about anything that we covered here in this video down in the comments below. And again, while you're going down to those comments, please hit that like button. If you're a new viewer or returning viewer to this channel and you like what you saw here and you want to see more from me, please consider hitting that subscribe button and help support the channel. I release videos every Wednesday and Sunday, so you'll always have something to look forward to. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one.